Have you ever tried to get really good at something new? Maybe learning a new programming language or picking up a musical instrument.
Oh, yeah.
Or even just figuring out, the best way to navigate a complex new city.
Definitely.
You know that feeling? Sometimes the concepts just click, right? They sort of land on fertile ground because they connect to things you already know.
Mm-hmm.
But other times it feels like trying to build a sandcastle right when the tide's coming in.
Yeah.
The new information just washes away because you don't have the right foundation.
Well, that relatable struggle, that feeling, is actually key to understanding a really fundamental concept in how individuals, teams, and especially organizations learn and innovate.
Okay.
It's called absorptive capacity.
Absorptive capacity. Okay, it sounds like you're talking about being able to soak something up, maybe like a super sponge for knowledge.
Exactly. That's actually a pretty good metaphor. At its core, absorptive capacity is defined as the ability for a firm or an individual really to recognize the value of new external information.
Okay.
Yes, external. Then to assimilate it, which means truly understanding it, integrating it into their existing knowledge base, and then finally to apply it, to put it to practical use, often for commercial ends or, to improve performance somehow.
So it's not just about generating brilliant ideas internally like some lone genius in a lab. It's heavily focused on being able to look outside yourself or your organization, spot something valuable out there, understand it deeply, and then actually do something useful with it.
Precisely. I mean, think about how much innovation in the world happens not from a firm inventing something entirely new from scratch, but from borrowing, adapting, improving upon ideas that originated somewhere else.
Right, that makes sense.
And this isn't a new observation either. Way back in the 1950s, James March and Herbert Simon noted that most innovations seem to result from borrowing rather than pure isolated invention.
And later research kind of confirmed that pattern.
It really did. Studies looking at the sources of innovation consistently show this. You can see it at different levels, too. Look at Japan's post-WWII economic rise. A huge part of that was their, frankly, remarkable ability to rapidly adopt, improve, and commercialize technologies developed elsewhere.
Right.
Or think about whole industries like the evolution of computers, where innovation involved pulling together components and ideas from tons of different sources. Or even the aluminum industry, big advances there were driven by external scientific discoveries. And even inside a single large company, innovative performance often hinges on crucial information flowing between different units, not just R&D, but say marketing, bringing in insights about customer needs, or manufacturing identifying ways to improve processes, information originating outside the formal R&D creation process itself.
Okay, this is already painting a much broader picture than maybe I initially thought. So our mission for this deep dive then is to take this core idea of absorptive capacity, really unpack what it is, explore how it works for individuals and for organizations, understand what factors might boost it or hinder it, and crucially, figure out why it's so absolutely essential for thriving in a world that's constantly throwing new information and challenges at us.
That's precisely our mission. And the absolute cornerstone, the non-negotiable prerequisite for absorptive capacity, whether you're talking about one person or a massive corporation, is prior related knowledge.
Okay, so you can't just show up as a blank slate and suddenly absorb complex new ideas.
Yeah.
You absolutely need a foundation already built.
You absolutely need that foundation. Wesley Cohen and Daniel Levinthal, in their foundational 1990 paper, Absorptive Capacity, A New Perspective on Learning and Innovation, they make this the central argument. They state that absorptive capacity is largely, fundamentally, a function of the level of prior related knowledge. And this isn't just about knowing facts. It includes a whole range of things, basic skills, maybe a shared language or framework for understanding, being familiar with the latest concepts and developments in a particular field, or even related fields. This prior knowledge acts like the key in the map. It's what lets you even recognize that a piece of new external information might have potential value for you.
Right, you have to know enough to see the opportunity.
Exactly. It provides the context to truly understand that information beyond just hearing the words or reading the text. And finally, it gives you the conceptual hooks, the existing pathways in your brain or, in your organization's routines to connect the new information to what you already do so you can actually use it effectively.
Let's really dig into that prior knowledge piece then, starting at the individual level. What does the psychology of learning tell us about why prior knowledge is so powerful for absorption?
Great starting point. because the cognitive basis is absolutely fundamental here. Research in cognitive psychology has consistently shown that our ability to learn new things is heavily, heavily dependent on what we already know and how that knowledge is structured in our minds. Your accumulated prior knowledge acts like a powerful filter and an accelerator. It not only helps you make sense of incoming information, but it significantly improves your ability to store it, recall it later, and use it in flexible ways.
So the common wisdom that the more you know, the easier it is to learn more isn't just a saying, it's actually psychologically grounded.
It really is. Psychologists like Gordon Bower and Ernest Hilgard explored this quite extensively. They suggested that memory development is a deeply self-reinforcing process.
Self-reinforcing, how so?
Well, think about building a library or maybe a mental database. The more concepts, categories, patterns, and objects you already have stored and organized in your memory, the easier it becomes to slot in new information that relates to those existing structures.
Okay.
It doesn't just sit there isolated. It integrates, it connects, becoming more facile and usable in different contexts because it's linked into a richer network.
It's like having a really detailed mental framework, right? When a new piece of information comes along, if you already have a place for it, or you can see how it connects to multiple existing points, it's much easier to understand and remember than if it's just floating out there completely isolated.
Exactly. Learning isn't just about rote memorization. Our memory systems work primarily through associative learning. We record new events, facts, or concepts by establishing linkages, connections with the concepts and structures we already have in place. As Bower and Hilgard emphasized, the richness of your existing knowledge, how much you know the differentiation within that knowledge, how distinct and well-defined your concepts are, and critically, the sheer number of meaningful linkages you've built between categories in your existing knowledge structure. All these things are what enable you to make sense of and truly acquire new knowledge effectively.
But just being exposed to new information isn't quite enough, is it? The paper mentioned something about the problem of context.
Ah, yes, that's a crucial nuance. Researchers like Peter Lindsay and Donald Norman highlighted this. They used a great analogy. Learning a language.
Okay.
You can memorize a list of vocabulary words, right? But that doesn't mean you can understand or speak the language fluently. To truly understand complex phrases, idioms, nuanced meanings, you need a vast body of contextual knowledge, cultural understanding, grammatical structures, common usage patterns that you've already built up.
Right.
A new word, they explained, is essentially just a label, a pointer to a set of structures or concepts within your memory system. If those underlying structures aren't there yet, if you lack the contextual knowledge the word might be nominally acquired, you can repeat it.
You can say the word.
I can say the word, exactly. But you won't be able to use it well because you don't grasp its full meaning or how it connects to everything else.
Like someone learning a technical term, maybe in programming, like polymorphism, they might memorize the definition from a textbook.
Right.
But without understanding object-oriented concepts or how it's actually applied in code, the term is just a label. They haven't truly absorbed the concept or its utility.
Precisely. They have the word, the label, but not the underlying contextual knowledge to make it truly intelligible and usable. And this relates directly to another fascinating idea. Learning to learn.
That's learning to learn.
Yeah, there's a significant body of psychological research suggesting that prior experience with learning tasks actually improves your performance on subsequent similar tasks. Think of Harry Harlow's classic experiments with monkeys learning discrimination problems. They got faster and better with practice. They developed what he called learning sets.
So is it that you get better at the process of learning itself, like finding better strategies? Or is it just that because you have more prior knowledge built up, you need to learn less new stuff each time to reach a certain level of competence?
Well, the paper argues that actually both explanations ultimately point back to the critical importance of prior knowledge. Whether you've gotten better at how to learn or simply have more background so the new material feels less new, it's the accumulated experience and knowledge that makes the difference.
Okay.
The examples they cite illustrate this beautifully. Students who have mastered algebra find calculus significantly easier to learn because they already have those foundational mathematical concepts locked down.
Right. That makes sense.
Similarly, students who already knew the Pascal programming language, they were found to learn LASP more effectively. Why? Not just because they learned a programming language before, but because they had developed a better grasp of the underlying logic, the structure, the concepts common to programming in general. Their Pascal knowledge provided a crucial framework, a set of hooks, for understanding LISP.
And this isn't just limited to formal education or technical skills, right? It applies to problem solving too.
Absolutely. Learning and problem-solving capabilities are deeply, deeply intertwined. The methods, the strategies, the heuristics you use to solve problems are, in essence, the prior knowledge that enables you to acquire related problem-solving skills. Studies on how people learn programming, for instance, show they often create new programs by drawing analogies to examples they already understand well. Their success really hinges on the richness and depth of their prior understanding of why those examples work. Their underlying conceptual knowledge is key.
So learning, assimilating existing knowledge and problem solving, creating new knowledge are really like two sides of the same cognitive coin.
That's very much the argument put forth by researchers like Herbert Simon. He suggested that the preconditions and the fundamental processes for both learning and creative problem solving are actually quite similar. It's the prior possession of relevant knowledge, skills, and those established mental frameworks that enables the creative process. It allows individuals to make those novel, insightful associations and linkages that someone without that specific background simply wouldn't even consider.
Ah, the aha moment.
Exactly. This capability for novel association, built firmly on prior knowledge, is closely related to the psychological phenomenon we call insight, that sudden aha moment where a solution to a tricky problem becomes clear. The psychology literature really points to a strong overlap between what they term creative capacity and this idea of absorptive capacity.
Okay, so prior knowledge is absolutely key. But just having a big mental library isn't enough, is it? You need to build the ability to use the books effectively. How do you actually develop this individual absorptive capacity? Is just passive exposure enough?
Definitely not. That's a crucial point. Developing effective individual absorptive capacity requires significant intensity of effort. It's not just about letting information passively wash over you. Lindsay and Norman stress this. The more deeply you process new material, the more cognitive effort you invest in thinking about it, relating it to what you already know, questioning it, wrestling with it, the more associations you form with existing knowledge in your memory.
Okay.
And this dense network of associations makes the information far more accessible and retrievable later on. Remember Harlow's learning sets again? Building those foundational skills and cognitive structures takes time and deliberate effort, especially when you're first tackling related problems. You need that dedicated practice on the earlier challenges before you can efficiently handle more complex or novel situations down the line.
It sounds like learning is definitely hard work, particularly up front, but that investment pays off later in spades.
Absolutely. It's really an investment in your future learning ability. Now, alongside the depth of processing, and tied right back into the idea of prior knowledge, is the crucial role of diversity in your knowledge background.
Diversity. Why is diversity so vital for absorption, especially when you're looking for external knowledge?
Well, when you're seeking out and trying to make sense of external information, which often comes at you in messy, unstructured ways, and you might not know exactly where the next useful insight will pop up from having a diverse knowledge background, is a tremendous asset.
How so?
Diversity increases the probability that incoming information, even if it's from a totally unexpected domain or uses unfamiliar terms, will relate to something, somewhere, in your existing mental framework. It just gives you more potential points of connection, a broader base for you to assimilate that new information.
Okay, so a diverse background gives you more hooks for new ideas to grab onto, so to speak.
Exactly, more hooks. But diversity goes beyond just helping you absorb information. It also directly facilitates innovation itself.
Oh.
When individuals possess knowledge from different domains, it increases the likelihood they can make novel, non-obvious associations and linkages between those previously unconnected areas of knowledge. Someone with a very narrow, specialized background might completely miss these potential connections. So diversity in knowledge isn't just about better intake, it's also about fostering creative output.
So for individuals then, building strong absorptive capacity is about cultivating a deep, richly interconnected and diverse web of knowledge in your mind, and then actively working to process new information deeply.
That really captures the essence at the individual level. Now let's take this concept and try to scale it up to the organizational level. This is where it gets really interesting and frankly quite a bit more complex, because an organization's absorptive capacity is significantly more than just adding up the individual capacities of all the people who work there.
Okay, how does it become more than just the sum of its parts?
Well, an organization's absorptive capacity depends not only on its members being able to acquire information at the external interface, someone reading a scientific paper or attending an industry conference.
Right, the intake.
The intake, yes. But critically, it also depends on the organization's ability to exploit that acquired information effectively. And exploitation requires the transfer and sharing of that knowledge across and within the various subunits of the organization.
Oh, cool.
Someone in R&D might learn something absolutely groundbreaking, but if they can't effectively communicate it to the manufacturing team or the marketing folks, or maybe if those teams lack the necessary background knowledge to even understand and use it, then the organization's capacity to actually benefit from that new knowledge is severely limited.
So the internal communication pathways and the way expertise is distributed throughout the company become just as important as any individual's ability to learn something new.
Absolutely vital. To really understand organizational AC, you have to look at the structure of communication flows, both how the organization interacts with the outside world and how its different internal parts talk to each other. And you also need to consider how expertise is spread out or maybe concentrated among its members.
Okay.
Individuals who stand at the boundaries acting as bridges between the organization and external sources, or maybe between different departments, internally play a particularly special role here. These are often called gatekeepers or boundary spanners.
Right. I've heard those terms before in organizational studies.
Yeah.
What makes their role so significant in this context?
Well, these individuals, as described by researchers like Thomas Allen and Michael Tushman way back, are crucial for monitoring technical and scientific developments happening out in the external environment. They filter, they interpret, they often translate this outside information into a form that internal technical groups can actually understand and use.
Mm-hmm.
In organizations where the external technical knowledge is maybe very different from the knowledge base of the internal staff, skilled gatekeepers are pretty much indispensable. They can also take on the burden of scanning the environment, which frees up other technical personnel to focus on their core tasks.
But does relying on just a few gatekeepers have potential drawbacks? What if, say, those key individuals leave? Or what if the relevant external information is just too broad or unpredictable for one person or a small group to realistically manage?
That's a significant challenge, you're right, especially in fields undergoing rapid, uncertain technical change. The paper notes that when external information flows are somewhat random and it's not immediately clear which internal unit will find a piece of knowledge most useful, a highly centralized gatekeeper function might not be very effective. In those kinds of dynamic environments, a more organic structure is often better suited. This concept, described famously by Tom Burns and G.M. Stalker, involves a less rigid hierarchy, more flexible roles, and importantly for AC, a structure where a broader range of individuals are exposed to and interact with the external environment. It sort of diffuses the interface function.
So it increases the chances that relevant information will actually reach someone who can understand it and maybe route it to the right place.
Exactly. A more porous boundary between the organization and the outside world, with more people looking outwards.
Okay.
But even with skilled gatekeepers, or maybe a more diffuse interface, remember the point about knowledge transfer within the organization. The ease of internal communication, and therefore the overall organizational absorptive capacity, relies not just on the individual ability of the gatekeeper or boundary spanner, but crucially on the expertise of the individuals they are communicating with. If the knowledge structures within the organization are highly differentiated, meaning different departments or individuals have very specialized and distinct bodies of knowledge, then the baseline of relevant background knowledge required by the group receiving the information might need to be quite high for effective communication to even happen.
So you need some kind of shared language or a shared baseline understanding for people in different parts of the organization to actually talk meaningfully about and effectively use new external knowledge.
Absolutely critical. Researchers like Dearborn and Simon and Katz and Cohen highlighted this need for a baseline of shared knowledge and language for effective communication within organizations, especially across those departmental lines. But here's where a really tricky trade-off emerges. Organizations face this constant tension between the need for efficient internal communication and the need to tap into diverse external knowledge sources.
How does that tension manifest itself? What does it look like?
Well, think about it. To communicate efficiently within a specific department or a specialized unit, people naturally develop a shared, often highly specialized, language and common understanding. Think of the jargon in engineering or marketing or finance.
Sure.
Now, while this specialized language is great for talking to each other within the group, if it becomes too distinct, and if the internal knowledge base becomes too narrowly specialized and maybe too overlapping across individuals, it can severely hinder the organization's ability to connect with and incorporate knowledge from outside its walls. This is a major root cause of the infamous, not invented here, NIH syndrome.
Right, NIH, I've definitely seen that.
Yeah, valuable external ideas get resisted, dismissed, or sometimes they're just simply not understood because they don't fit the firm's existing specialized knowledge framework, or they're communicated in a language the internal staff just doesn't grasp. Katz and Allen found that communication with outside areas actually tends to decline with project tenure, suggesting a kind of increasing insularity, which might reflect this risk of excessive specialization over time.
So you need some overlap in knowledge across individuals and units so they can communicate effectively, but too much overlap, like everyone knowing the exact same narrow thing, kills the diversity you need to absorb anything truly new or different from the outside.
That's the core balancing act, perfectly put. You absolutely need sufficient overlap in knowledge across individuals to ensure effective communication can happen. But assuming that baseline is met, diversity of knowledge structures across individuals is crucial. Yeah. As Herbert Simon pointed out, diverse knowledge structures coexisting within the same mind stimulate learning and novel problem solving. At the organizational level, interaction between individuals with diverse knowledge backgrounds, provided they have enough shared knowledge to communicate significantly, augments the organization's capacity for making novel linkages and associations. For innovating, it goes beyond what any single specialized individual could achieve on their own.
Right.
Research by James Utterback also supports this, noting that diversity in the work setting is a key stimulant for new ideas. So organizational AC isn't just about having smart people, it's distributed across this mosaic of individual capabilities and, crucially, how well those different pieces connect and interact.
It's the network, the connections between different kinds of knowledge within the firm that really creates the organizational capacity.
Precisely. And knowing who knows what within the organization, and maybe even who knows what outside the organization, becomes incredibly important too. Beyond just technical knowledge, having an awareness of where complementary expertise resides both internally and externally is crucial for leveraging the AC of individuals and strengthening the overall organizational AC. Eric von Hippel's work on manufacturer-user or buyer-supplier relationships really highlights the importance of broad internal and external networks for building this kind of critical awareness, knowing who might have the information or expertise you need down the road.
And this risk of excessive specialization getting too narrow, does the paper link it to common business practices, like focusing too much on efficiency?
It does, yeah. The paper suggests that the difficulties posed by excessive specialization highlight potential liabilities in pursuing production efficiencies, primarily through learning by doing, especially in industries where the technical landscape is changing fast and building absorptive capacity is really vital.
How so?
Well, while learning by doing makes a firm incredibly efficient at the activities it's already engaged in, it improves existing routines, it doesn't inherently contribute much to the diversity of knowledge needed to learn or create something fundamentally new.
Right. Nelson and Winter's concept of remembering by doing suggests that an intense focus on current routines might actually lead to a loss or a diminishing of the more diverse background knowledge an individual or organization might have once possessed, which ironically could undermine their future AC and innovative performance.
So getting too good, too focused on doing just one thing really efficiently might actually make you less capable of learning entirely new things later on. That's pretty counterintuitive.
It's a real risk if it's not balanced by deliberate efforts to maintain or inject knowledge diversity. The paper also emphasizes the importance of building cross-functional absorptive capacity.
Cross-functional. Meaning between departments like R&D and manufacturing.
Exactly. Effective innovation, particularly in complex products, requires tight integration and strong communication between complementary functions like R&D, manufacturing, and marketing. This demands that people in these different units have enough overlapping knowledge to understand each other's worlds and coordinate effectively.
The paper cites the well-documented success of Japanese firms, often attributed in part to their really close design manufacturing linkages and practices like overlapping product development cycles, which contrasts with a more traditional sequential siloed approach often seen elsewhere.
Like the Japanese practice of rotating R&D personnel through manufacturing and maybe even marketing roles. That seems like a direct way to build that overlapping cross-functional knowledge base.
Precisely. That kind of practice directly builds that crucial knowledge overlap while simultaneously enhancing the diversity of background knowledge across different functional areas within the firm. It suggests that effective organizational AC requires not just breadth across functions, but also some level of intensity or depth of experience within each relevant knowledge domain. Just superficial exposure isn't enough if you need to truly understand and integrate knowledge across these different areas.
Okay, we've covered individual AC, organizational AC, how it builds on prior knowledge, the importance of diversity, the challenges of structure and communication. Does the ability to build AC change over time? Is it something you can continuously improve, or does it become harder?
That's a great question, and the answer is that it's very much cumulative. And this cumulative nature has profound implications because it also makes absorptive capacity path-dependent.
Cumulative and path-dependent. Okay, unpack that.
Like individual AC, organizational AC is a capability that builds upon itself. Investing in developing some AC now makes it easier, faster, and more efficient to build additional AC in the future, even potentially in related but distinct knowledge domains.
So the initial investment in learning sort of pays compound interest on your future learning ability.
You could definitely think of it that way. And possessing this related expertise, this existing AC, also significantly shapes an organization's expectations about future opportunities. It allows firms to better understand, evaluate, and even anticipate emerging technological advances and their potential commercial relevance. They are just better equipped to read the signals coming from the environment.
This cumulative nature and the way it shapes expectations, it sounds like they could create powerful momentum, but maybe also potential traps.
They absolutely do. These two features, the cumulativeness and the influence on expectations, lead directly to path dependence. And a critical, potentially dangerous implication of this path dependence is what the paper terms lockout. Lockout. If a firm doesn't invest in developing the necessary absorptive capacity early on in a rapidly evolving technical field, maybe because they didn't see the value initially, or they were just focused elsewhere, they may find themselves permanently, or at least very difficultly, locked out. They can become unable to assimilate or exploit valuable new information in that field later on, regardless of how obvious its value becomes to everyone else.
Wow. Why is it so hard to catch up later? Why can't they just decide to invest heavily once the field matures or becomes clearly important?
Well, there are a couple of interconnected reasons for that. First, if the firm didn't develop AC early, its beliefs and expectations about the technological opportunities in that emerging field might simply not change over time. They won't be looking for, or maybe won't be able to interpret, the subtle signals of progress that firms with relevant AC readily pick up on. So they just continue not to invest because they don't see the opportunity or the necessity.
Okay, so they're blind to the signals.
Right. And second, compounding that first problem, remember that prior knowledge facilitates subsequent learning. Without that early investment in foundational AC, the cost and effort required to develop the necessary AC later to build that missing foundation pretty much from scratch are significantly higher compared to firms that invested incrementally over time. A low initial investment makes investing in future periods less attractive, even if through some external shock or maybe a competitor's action, the firm does eventually become aware of the opportunity.
It sounds like a classic catch-22. You need some AC to recognize the value of investing in more AC. And without that initial bit, you might never even start down the path.
Exactly. And sometimes that not invented here syndrome we talked about isn't just managerial stubbornness or arrogance. It can actually be a direct outcome of this lockout effect. The external ideas are simply too far removed from the firm's existing knowledge base, its accumulated AC, for its personnel to truly appreciate their significance or even access them effectively.
This cumulative and path-dependent nature also seems like it would be linked to whether a company tends to be a proactive innovator or more of a reactive follower.
It absolutely is. Absorptive capacity strongly influences an organization's goals, its aspirations, and its search behavior. Drawing on March and Simon's behavioral theory of the firm, companies with higher levels of AC tend to be more sensitive to external technical opportunities.
Okay.
They are more likely to be proactive searchers, seeking out and exploring opportunities in the environment regardless of whether their current performance is good or bad. They tend to maintain high aspiration levels related to technical progress and innovation leadership.
Right.
In contrast, firms with lower AC tend to be more reactive. They primarily engage in significant search for alternatives, including looking for external knowledge only when their performance falls below their current aspiration levels, which might be defined more narrowly, maybe just in terms of market share or short-term profitability rather than technical leadership.
And this creates those self-reinforcing cycles you sometimes see in industries, right? Innovative companies tend to stay innovative, while those that lag behind really struggle to catch up.
Precisely. Think about companies like, historically, maybe Hewlett-Packard or Sony, known for their consistent, aggressive pursuit of technical innovation, versus firms that are generally followers. This dynamic also helps explain why established firms often struggle so profoundly with competence-destroying technological changes.
The Schumpeterian creative destruction idea.
Exactly. The kind Schumpeter described, where a new technology completely invalidates the existing knowledge and skills of the incumbents. A firm without any prior AC in that entirely new field might find it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to acquire it rapidly enough to compete effectively. And adding to the irony, their low capacity to update their knowledge might mean they don't even recognize the magnitude of the threat or the crucial need to develop that new AC until it's far too late.
Okay, so AC is this foundational, cumulative, path-dependent capability. It's built on individual knowledge and organizational structure, and it determines a firm's ability to learn from the outside and innovate. But, theory is one thing. How can we actually see its importance in the real world? Did Cohen and Levinthal find empirical evidence linking AC to concrete business decisions, like, say, how much firms invest in R&D?
Yes. That leads us to a major contribution of their paper. Empirically testing the link between absorptive capacity and a firm's investment in research and development, or R&D.
Okay.
They propose a really key insight here. R&D isn't just about generating brand new discoveries internally. It also plays a crucial and often overlooked role in building a firm's absorptive capacity.
So doing your own research doesn't just produce patents or new products. It actually builds the internal capability to understand and use other people's research too. It strengthens your learning muscles, so to speak.
That's exactly the dual role they attribute to R&D. It contributes to the firm's own stock of knowledge, enabling innovation, that's the output side. And it builds the firm's capacity to learn from external sources, that's the input side to AC.
Okay.
So if AC is important for innovation, and if R&D is a key mechanism for building AC, then firms' R&D investment decisions should be influenced by factors that make it easier or harder, or maybe more or less valuable, to learn from the external environment. The empirical challenge for them was to see if R&D spending levels actually reflected these characteristics of what they called the learning environment.
The learning environment.
Yeah.
What kind of characteristics did they look at in their empirical study?
They examined factors related to both the quantity of relevant external knowledge available and the difficulty of learning from it. First, the quantity. This is often captured by the concept of technological opportunity, referring to the richness and accessibility of the external knowledge base. They predicted that the more relevant external technical knowledge is out there, the greater the incentive for firms to invest in R&D to build the AC needed to recognize and exploit it. They also predicted this incentive would be even stronger when learning from that knowledge is more difficult.
Okay, that makes sense. More opportunity means more value in being able to grab it. So you invest more in the grabbing tool, which is R&D building AC. What about the difficulty of learning part?
Well, when the underlying scientific and technological knowledge is complex, maybe abstract, or just plain hard to assimilate, building absorptive capacity relies more heavily on a firm's own internal R&D effort. The marginal impact of R&D on building AC is actually greater in those difficult learning environments.
Okay.
Therefore, the paper predicted that industries characterized by more difficult learning conditions would tend to have higher R&D spending overall.
So, if the knowledge in your field is really complex or hard to get a handle on, you basically have to put more resources into your own R&D just to keep your head above water and be able to learn from what's happening externally.
That's the logical extension, yeah. Now, what makes learning easy or difficult? The paper identified several characteristics of the knowledge itself. One key factor is the targeted quality of the external knowledge.
Targeted quality, meaning how directly applicable or ready to use it is.
Exactly. How directly applicable is the knowledge coming from a particular external source? Is it, say, basic science from a university, which is foundational but often abstract and requires translation? Or is it more applied knowledge coming from maybe an equipment supplier, which might be very specific and immediately useful, maybe even embedded in the equipment itself?
Okay, I see the distinction.
So the paper distinguished between sources of knowledge, broadly categorized by how targeted they are. They expected that drawing on knowledge from basic sciences, fundamental research in areas like biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics, which is typically less targeted and harder to assimilate, would require firms to invest more in their own R&D to build the necessary AC. Compared to absorbing more targeted knowledge, say, from an equipment supplier, which is often easier to integrate. They actually ranked potential extra industry knowledge sources roughly by this targeted quality and predicted effect on R&D. Universities were seen as least targeted, often basic science, then government labs, then materials suppliers, and finally equipment suppliers, seen as most targeted, often applied or embodied knowledge.
So the prediction was an industry relying heavily on university research should show higher R&D intensity than one relying more on improvements from equipment manufacturers, because that university knowledge is just harder to absorb.
That's precisely what the theory predicted. Other factors they considered that affect the ease of learning included the pace of advance in a field, obviously. A faster pace requires continuous effort and thus more R&D just to keep AC current. The cumulativeness of findings fields where new research builds heavily and sequentially on prior discoveries require more R&D just to understand the established body of knowledge needed to grasp the new stuff. And codifiability, how easily the knowledge can be written down, formalized, and transferred. You know, the difference between explicit and tacit knowledge. Less explicit, less codified knowledge is generally harder to assimilate and might require more internal R&D or maybe hands-on learning by doing efforts to fully grasp.
Okay, those factors for learning difficulty make a lot of sense. Now let's talk about spillovers. Traditionally, we hear that if competitors can easily copy your R&D results, it discourages you from investing in the first place. How does the absorptive capacity perspective handle that?
This is where the paper offers a really counterintuitive and I think incredibly important twist. While spillovers do create that negative deterrent to R&D, reducing the returns on your own discoveries if rivals can easily exploit them.
Right, the standard view.
The standard view. But, they argue, spillovers also create a positive incentive for R&D, specifically from the perspective of absorptive capacity.
A positive incentive. How?
The argument is that investing in your own R&D helps build the necessary prior knowledge and capability, the absorptive capacity that you need to understand, recognize, and actually exploit those very spillovers coming from your competitors.
Wait, hang on. So my R&D spending helps me learn from your R&D spending when your results spill out into the public domain.
Exactly. You need the internal expertise, often built through your own R&D efforts, to even make sense of the knowledge that's circulating publicly from your rival's work, let alone figure out how to use it. So the net effect of spillovers on a firm's R&D spending, according to their model, depends on the balance between that traditional negative deterrent they copy you and this newly highlighted positive absorption incentive you can learn from them.
Okay, that's fascinating. When does the absorption incentive tend to win out over the deterrent?
Well, the positive absorption incentive is predicted to be stronger when learning from that spilled knowledge is difficult, because in that scenario, your own R&D becomes even more critical for building the necessary AC to understand it.
Right.
It's also stronger when firms are less interdependent, meaning a rival benefiting from your R&D results doesn't hurt your own profits quite as much. Factors influencing this interdependence include things like market concentration. Less concentrated markets mean more competitors, which kind of dilutes the impact of any single rival gaining from your spillover. And also the price elasticity of demand in highly price-sensitive markets. A rival gaining even a small edge from your spillover can quickly erode your profits, which increases interdependence and strengthens the negative deterrent effect.
So, in a maybe fragmented industry where information travels fast and your rivals are going to get their hands on your findings anyway, you might actually be better off investing more in R&D, not less, just to ensure you're one of the first and best equipped to understand and utilize their spilled knowledge when it inevitably gets out.
That's the potential dynamic when the positive absorption incentive is significant enough. The paper used data from the late 1980s based on a major survey of R&D managers across many different industries, the Levin, Kleberich, Nelson, and Winter survey, to empirically test these predictions about how characteristics of the learning environment influence industry-level R&D intensity, which they measured as R&D spending as a percentage of sales.
And what were the key findings from that empirical analysis? Did the data actually support these complex predictions?
Largely, yes. They found pretty good support for their model. They confirmed the prediction that the quality or nature of the external knowledge source really matters. Industries that reported basic sciences like biology, chemistry, physics, math as being more relevant to their technical progress tended to have significantly higher R&D intensity compared to industries where applied sciences like computer science, materials science, engineering were reported as more relevant after controlling for other factors. This strongly supported the idea that drawing on knowledge that is less targeted and inherently harder to assimilate necessitates greater investment in internal R&D just to build the required AC. The one exception they noted was computer science itself, which was highly relevant and associated with high R&D, likely due to its exceptionally rapid pace of change at the time, which creates its own powerful imperative for high R&D investment.
Okay. And what about the prediction about the different extra industry sources, like universities versus suppliers? Did that ranking hold up?
That ranking was also generally confirmed in their data analysis. The relevance of knowledge coming from universities, which they argued was typically the least targeted and hardest to absorb, had the largest positive effect on industry R&D intensity, statistically speaking. This was followed by government labs, then material suppliers, and finally equipment suppliers, which provided the most targeted and often embodied knowledge. This empirical result really strongly supports the argument that the difficulty of absorbing knowledge from a particular source directly influences how much R&D you need to do internally to build the capacity to actually use it.
And the really complex spillover effect. Did they see any evidence of R&D actually increasing with spillovers in certain contexts?
Yes, surprisingly, they did find some evidence consistent with that. In several industries in their sample, particularly in sectors like chemicals and electrical equipment, R&D intensity actually showed a statistically significant positive association with increasing spillovers from competitors, even after trying to account for other factors.
Really?
Yeah. Now, while this finding was correlational and not, a perfectly isolated test of the interaction effects predicted in their full theoretical model, it strongly suggests that the positive absorption incentive associated with spillovers was indeed significant enough in those specific industries and market structures to at least partially, and in some cases maybe even fully, counteract the traditional negative deterrent effect on R&D.
Wow. Okay, so R&D is clearly not just about discovering new things yourself. It seems fundamentally about building the capability to understand and leverage the entire external knowledge ecosystem, including, potentially, your competitor's output. That really does change how we might think about innovation strategy, doesn't it?
It fundamentally shifts the perspective, I think. Their view has significant implications for several aspects of innovative activity. First, it provides a really fresh lens on why firms might invest in basic research.
How does it change our understanding of basic research investment?
Well, traditionally, firms investing in basic research were often seen as pursuing specific, maybe potentially breakthrough discoveries they could patent and directly commercialize. The AC perspective suggests a different, perhaps more strategically fundamental rationale. Firms invest in basic research, which is abstract and difficult to assimilate, precisely to build the broad general background knowledge, that high level of absorptive capacity needed to understand, evaluate, and ultimately exploit external scientific and technological advances made elsewhere, maybe in universities or by competitors.
So it's about positioning yourself to be a really effective, fast-second innovator, capable of quickly grasping and responding when others make major scientific leaps.
Exactly. The focus shifts from viewing R&D purely in terms of knowledge output, new inventions, to recognizing its critical role in building knowledge input capability, the capacity to absorb and utilize external knowledge effectively. This perspective suggests we should probably expect R&D investment, including maybe in basic research, to increase as industries evolve to draw upon a wider and more diverse range of underlying technical fields. Think about how modern automobile manufacturing now has to integrate complex knowledge from microelectronics, software, advanced materials, AI, and more, far beyond just traditional mechanical engineering.
That makes sense. It also seems crucial for understanding how quickly new ideas spread throughout an economy or an industry, the whole process of innovation, adoption, and diffusion.
Absolutely. The ease and speed with which new innovations diffuse through a population of potential users depends heavily on whether those users already possess the necessary pre-existing knowledge, the absorptive capacity related to that innovation.
Right.
Think about the examples we touched on. Personal computers initially diffused faster among individuals or organizations that already had some prior experience with mainframe or mini computers because they had a relevant knowledge base about computing concepts. Similarly, programmers who knew Pascal found it much easier to adopt LISP because they already understood fundamental programming logic. Innovations that are more embodied may be integrated directly into capital equipment or tools, requiring less new conceptual learning by the user, may well diffuse faster than disembodied innovations, like new managerial techniques or complex software tools that require potential users to build significant complementary expertise or fundamentally change their workflow and understanding.
And what about firms working together on R&D, like in cooperative ventures or consortia? Does AC shed light on why those are formed, or maybe how successful they tend to be?
It does offer some interesting perspectives there, too. The AC perspective can help explain several patterns observed in cooperative R&D ventures. For instance, why are such ventures often more common in more mature, maybe slower-moving industries? Perhaps it's because the cost of assimilating the knowledge generated by the venture is lower, where the underlying technology isn't changing quite as rapidly. It might also help explain the frequent pressure for short-term, tangible results often seen in basic research ventures involving multiple firms. Perhaps the participating firms aren't fully prepared or willing to make the necessary internal investments in absorptive capacity needed to effectively exploit the uncertain long-term gains that might eventually come from fundamental research collaboration.
No.
The paper argues pretty strongly that merely participating in a venture isn't sufficient to guarantee benefit. Firms must also make dedicated internal investments in AC to effectively understand and utilize the knowledge that comes out of the collaboration.
So just being in the room where the knowledge is created isn't enough. You need to have built the internal capability to actually take that knowledge home and make something useful out of it.
That's a key takeaway for thinking about collaborations, definitely.
Okay, this has been a really deep dive into a powerful and I think quite intuitive concept once you break it down. Let's try and bring it all together. What are the absolute key insights we should take away from this exploration of absorptive capacity?
I think the core insights are fundamentally important for understanding innovation in pretty much any dynamic environment. First, absorptive capacity, that ability to recognize, assimilate, and apply external knowledge, is absolutely critical for innovation and for staying competitive over the long haul.
Right.
Second, it's built upon a foundation of prior related knowledge and also requires diversity of expertise. Third, it develops cumulatively over time, which leads to that crucial idea of path dependence. Fourth, the internal structure of an organization, how communication flows, how expertise is distributed, significantly influences its overall organizational AC. And finally, crucially, as the empirical evidence presented by Cohen and Levinthal confirms, a firm's strategic investment decisions, particularly in R&D, are sensitive to the characteristics of the learning environment, things like how much external knowledge is available, how difficult that knowledge is to learn, and even the complex nature of spillovers from competitors.
The empirical results really do underscore that building this intangible capability, AC, is somehow part of firms' strategic calculus for navigating the whole innovation landscape.
They confirm that firms are, perhaps sometimes implicitly, making decisions based on these kinds of factors. However, despite its evident importance, absorptive capacity remains a largely intangible asset, right?
Yeah.
And its benefits are often indirect, difficult to measure precisely, and tend to materialize over the longer term. Which brings us to a final and, I think, critical question.
All right. And that question is?
When is a firm, or for that matter, maybe even an individual or a team, most likely to underinvest in building this absolutely critical capability, potentially causing significant harm down the road? The paper suggests this risk is highest when the knowledge that needs to be acquired isn't closely related to the organization's current routine activities or its existing areas of specialization. This is especially true for knowledge in entirely new domains, maybe far removed from current operations or expertise.
Because building AC in a completely new area isn't just a natural byproduct of doing their day-to-day work. It requires specific effort.
Exactly. It requires deliberate, dedicated effort and investment. It might mean allocating R&D resources away from immediate product improvements, or maybe encouraging technical personnel to spend time exploring seemingly unrelated scientific fields, potentially sacrificing some current output or depth in their existing specialization just to build breadth in a potentially important new domain.
Right.
And since the benefits of this kind of investment in distant AC aren't immediate, aren't easily quantifiable in the short term, and might involve diverting resources from activities with clearer, faster returns, firms can be understandably hesitant. It's often just easier to keep optimizing what you're already good at, even if that familiar path is unknowingly leading towards a potential lockout situation in the future.
That is a powerful and slightly unsettling thought to end on. It makes you think. Think about your own learning journey, or maybe the challenges facing your team, your department, or your entire organization right now. Where might you or your group be running the risk of future lockout, simply because you haven't yet invested the necessary time, effort, or resources into building the foundational background knowledge in an area that feels new, uncertain, or perhaps even unrelated to your core focus today? What kind of seemingly non-essential prior-related knowledge do you need to start cultivating now to ensure you're able to recognize, understand, and utilize the exciting, potentially game-changing information that might emerge down the road?
This deep dive into absorptive capacity, really sparked by Cohen and Levinthal's seminal 1990 paper, truly provides a potent framework, a powerful lens for understanding learning, innovation, and strategic choices, not just in the corporate world, but really in any context where making sense of a rapidly changing, information-rich environment is absolutely key to future success.
Definitely something to keep exploring. It feels like it has implications everywhere you look.